Joining us now is Congressman Louie Gohmert, Republican of Texas. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Great to be with you, Libby.
It's Texas morning here on C-SPAN after having Representative Sheila Jackson Lee on before you. Wanted to start off with this story from Politico. Fast and furious contempt vote is up in the air. The Attorney General is planning to meet with the Chairman of Oversight, Darrell Issa, today. Do you expect them to come to some sort of agreement? And do you think the contempt vote should go forward?
Well, it depends on what's produced. If the Attorney General produces all the things that were requested properly, then there wouldn't be a need for contempt. There actually already has been an act of contempt, and that's refusing to furnish documents that were properly requested over a year ago, and continuing to simply provide some bluff and bluster in the year since. So. We could go ahead with a vote. I think the contemptible actions already happened in refusing to comply with a legitimate request. But if he turns everything over, then I'd say there's no need for a vote.
How political is this?
Well, it may be very political from the Attorney General's standpoint. I was shocked during our last hearing, Attorney General, when he said, and I think it was in answer to one of Randy Forbes' questions, there are political aspects to justice. Libby, that flew all over me. I mean, I've spent so much of my life as a prosecutor, judge, chief justice. There's no political aspects if you're going to have true justice. That's why the statute of justice has a blinder on it. You don't look at anybody's political persuasion, race, creed, color. You know, you don't look at any of those things. Gender, that's not supposed to matter. What's supposed to matter is true, fair justice. So to have the highest-ranking justice official in this administration, in this country, say that justice has political aspects was just so offensive to me. But so that's why I say there may be political aspects, as the Attorney General has already said, for this administration. But for some of us, we really do just want the country to do what's right, the people that are running the country to do what's right. And it may not be a surprise to you, but I have a lot of people in my party's leadership who are not always very happy with me. In fact, I asked our whip before I came over, I said, anything you want to say? And he says, it wouldn't matter if I told you. So anyway, you know, some of us, what's important is the country.
Representative Louie Gohmert, Republican of Texas, representing the 1st District of that state, serving his 4th term. He's on the Judiciary Committee, Immigration Policy and Enforcement Subcommittee, and then also Natural Resources, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Let's talk, though, for a moment about the immigration issue. The president changed his policy on Friday. Latino voters show new enthusiasm for Obama, says a headline in the Baltimore Sun. A deportation freeze pumps up support. Will your party suffer because of this?
Well, I don't know. That's, to me, not what's important, whether a party suffers. It's when the country is suffering. And when you have, again, the Justice Department, they already showed their hand. They started going after states that were simply trying to make sure that those who voted were actually eligible to vote. I mean, it keeps bringing back the old line from the late, great Lyndon Johnson when he told his campaign worker who was urging him to move to the next tombstone. Lyndon told this story. He said, come on, Lyndon, you know, we can't read what's on that tombstone. He said, no, sir, this man has every bit as much right to vote as anybody else in this cemetery. You know, some people think, hey, it's not fair. Everybody in the cemetery ought to be able to vote if anybody does. But the Attorney General goes after states that are trying to clean up their records, and then immediately thereafter the President announces that they're going to give 800,000 people who are illegally here a chance to go to work in front of African Americans, other Americans, but I bring up African Americans because they've got like the highest unemployment rate for young people in history. So why would you do that? Well, there are politics involved. And that poll is indicative that the president is doing exactly what he thinks is good for him, but it's certainly not good for the country. And others sometimes say, well, you must be against Immigration. I really believe, Libby, that immigration has helped make us the greatest country in the world. You know, e pluribus unum, out of many one. People come from all over and become Americans, which we saw on 9/12, the way it didn't matter who you were, gender, race, national origin, around our squares, and we held hands, we sang hymns, we prayed together. We were Americans. It was not a hyphenated American. I think it is a lifeblood for this country, but it's got to be legal. And so for that reason, I say, hey, let's let people come legally. Let's give them work visas if that's what they need to come legally. But we, and Tom Sowell said this so well this morning, I brought an article. He pointed out that not only is border control fundamental, but what is fundamental is the principle that immigration policies does not exist to accommodate foreigners, but to protect Americans. And the American culture has made this world the richest, freest, most powerful nation for more than a century. We've got to have border security. If you start giving additional incentives to lure people into this country without controlling the border, then we just created a bigger problem. First, control the border, then we can work out these immigration issues. So it's political to some. Heck, I've got a bill that would would be more freely giving in visas, but since we're going bankrupt and since health care costs are a large part of that, it would require, in order to get a visa, you have to show that you'll be covered by health insurance. If a farmer wants you to come in and wants you to have a worker visa to pick the crops, we're told, well, you won't get fruits and vegetables if we can't do this. Fine, but you got to cover them with an umbrella health insurance policy. So I think that's more the way to approach it, and not have the president just say, here's another incentive to come in here illegally and to vote for me illegally.
Here's the Tribune newspaper's survey and breakdown. You can see enthusiasm among Latinos for President Obama versus enthusiasm for Mitt Romney. Blue being more enthusiastic, dominating there. President Obama 49% versus Mitt Romney's 10%. Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, was on Sean Hannity's Fox News program last night and talked about how this issue is playing out.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately he needs to do better among all Americans. You want a president that would unite our country, and I think he's going to, especially when we start talking about economics, because, as I said, immigration is an important issue for Americans of Hispanic descent, but it is not the only issue. I mean, just as important, if not more so, is the fact that people are struggling to make ends meet. They're worried about the businesses they run. They're worried about their kids' future. They've been hurt badly by unemployment. Their house is worth less than what it was worth when they bought it, and nothing's gotten better over the last 4 years. Like most Americans, Hispanics are not better off than they were 4 years ago, and this president's responsible for that. And when we get into that argument, I think you're going to see Mitt Romney's numbers improve dramatically.
Senator Rubio on Fox News last night talking about how he thinks Mitt Romney can gain votes among the Hispanic community. Let's get to the phones and get some calls in. People are eager to talk to you. Mike is a Republican in Fleming Island, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning. First of all, I want to correct the record for the state of Florida, and then I have something, Representative, that I'd like you to correct the record on from the previous guest, Sheila Jackson Lee. The first thing is Florida never prevents anybody from voting. Okay. We always give them a provisional ballot. In fact, Governor Scott was taken off the rolls, purged in 2008 because they thought he was dead, and he got a provisional ballot and voted. So there is a way in Florida to cover everybody that wants to vote. But I need you to correct her statement on Fast and Furious, where she stated, and I tried to call in but couldn't, where she stated that President Bush started the Fast and Furious program, and I think that needs to be corrected for the record. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And for your first comment, of course, Florida is not preventing people who can legally vote from voting. In fact, they've made a procedure that will allow people who can illegally vote, but then it allows them to check and make sure that they were actually a vote when they did. You know, it's ironic to me, Mike, last time I went to the Justice Department, they would not let me in without a photo ID. So it's interesting, even to get to see the people that are suing Florida, you have to show a photo ID. And, you know, when I was in Iraq right after their first election, And those folks, I didn't see it in the national or international media, but there were 8x11 flyers all over the country of Iraq saying in their language, you vote, you die. And yet they turned out in droves to vote and then stuck their finger in permanent ink so that Al-Qaeda would know that they voted, and that would last for 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, what's wrong with making sure that we have a fair system of voting where people who are not allowed to vote don't vote? And like you say, in Florida, they do provide that procedure. In Texas, when we passed the law, our state legislature did a good job, and they followed the pattern that the Supreme Court had already said is constitutional, and that is to make sure that people who can't afford a few bucks for an ID can still get one. There are groups in Texas that will help you get to where you need to get your photo ID. So I think that is a bit unfair. And then as far as Fast and Furious, absolutely that was not started by President Bush. It was started by this Justice Department with Eric Holder at the top of it. And we can't imagine why he would be so restrictive in what he allows us to see unless he has a fear that it's going to tie him to his top people and possibly himself. So we know that when he testified before our committee last year and was asked, when did you first learn? He said a few weeks ago. And then it turned out before our next hearing, we had learned of it months before. And he basically said, a few weeks, a few months, what's the difference? You know, that's our justice official. So they're concerned. They're trying to lay off on Bush, as has been going on for the last 3.5 years. I was furious at President Bush over TARP. Did not agree with No Child Left Behind. I thought it was a big mistake. But for heaven's sake, quit blaming him for things that this administration created.
This is a story from the Arizona Republic looking at what the Bush administration had done. They had a prior project, a prior program that was similar to Fast and Furious.
Yeah, and Libby, it's important to note, when they set up that project, and it's not Fast and Furious, a whole different idea, but they were going to have a controlled sale, meaning controlled, we, as a judge, we had many controlled sales of drugs testified about, where there are people monitoring, watching, getting ready to move in. It was supposed to be controlled. Somebody made a mistake. The bad guys got scared. They took off, and so they weren't able to follow them. But that was intended to be controlled. Fast and Furious, from the beginning, was intended to be completely uncontrolled, sell thousands of guns to people who are criminals who should not have them, and then see what happens. That's uncontrolled, completely different idea.
Let's hear from Walter, an independent caller in Benson, Arizona. Good morning.
Hey, Walter.
Good morning, Representative Bowman.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure talking with you, sir.
Hey, and you can call me Louis, Walter. It's fine with me.
Okay, Louis, you're one of my favorites. I watch you all the time.
Bless your heart.
Yeah, I was wondering, though, what is going to happen with this Fast and Furious? Can that be pushed out?
I certainly hope so. The only way that you can have a true democratic country where people don't have the government controlling them, but they control the government the way it was intended, is to have a transparent government. And truthfully, I really admired some of the speeches that Senator Obama gave about the transparency his administration would have. Very admirable, including on health care and that everything would be transparent. And yet, Walter, that's not what we've seen. And it is high time we got to the transparency the president promised from his administration, even if it's only the last 5 or 6 months.
Washington, Pennsylvania. Bill, Democrats line. Good morning.
Hi, Bill.
Hey, good morning, C-SPAN, and thank you for everything you do. I have just a couple comments and have a question for the representative.
Sure, Bill.
First of all, I don't know how long the representative has been in office, but as Ms. Lee said earlier, she's been in office for 9 terms. First of all, that's the biggest problem in America. We need term limits. All these people in Congress and the Senate have been here too long. They don't have the best interest of America at hand. It's all politics, and it needs to end. People better get smart. Second of all, Mr. Obama, When he ran, promised to bring this country together. He said he was the only one that could bring it together. He's done nothing but divide the country. This country's never been more divided than it is now. It's race against race. It's money against the poor. That's all it is.
Bill, how long would you call for term limits? How long is too long to serve in Congress?
2 terms, 3 terms at the most.
Okay, let's get a response from the congressman.
Well, I've had the same concerns that Bill had. I've been in 7.5 years, 4 terms. I haven't been in 9. I didn't realize that my friend Sheila had been here that long. And I would support term limits, but what I have seen and I would want is not only, Bill, to have term limits for the elected officials, but also for those that are really running this place. You get to Washington, you find out it's not the elected officials. The regulators around this town, they make the rules, and as we've seen with this administration, if they don't like a law, they just make rules that are different. It also happened under President Bush. Congress would pass a law, and the regulators would say that we don't like that. They'd make regulations to do otherwise. A good example under Bush was Congress, after 9/11, wanted to give airline pilots, most of whom served honorably in the service, the chance to carry a gun into the cockpit if they wanted to. Well, we passed it. The FAA was totally against it, and so they passed a bunch of rules, pilots were telling me, making it incredibly difficult. Only one place they can go in order to get their certification to carry the gun. They made it so difficult. Most, as I understand it, still haven't been able to do it. So just one example. So I would like to see not only term limits for elected officials, but also for bureaucrats, that you can't stay in one position over that same length of time that elected officials can, because as the old quote from one bureaucrat up here was, well, the new summer help is here. They think they run the place, and the truth of the matter is they often do on some of these issues. So I like your idea, Bill. I was asked to, I took a term limit pledge when I ran for judge, because I knew that whoever replaced me as a judge after 3 terms would have all the power that I had the day that I left office. But I didn't take a term limit pledge because I didn't want to handicap myself coming into Congress unless we could do the same for everybody there. The only way we'll ever get term is to have enough of us that are willing to do it, stay around long enough to get that passed. But I really appreciate Bill's thoughtfulness on that, and unfortunately he's right.
Representative Louis Gohmert, Republican of Texas. Here's a story in the New York Times today. American children now struggling to adjust to life in Mexico. Jeffrey Acedo sat near the door of his 5th grade classroom here in central Mexico, staring outside through designer glasses that, like his Nike sneakers and Nike backpack, signaled a life lived almost entirely in the U.S. His parents are at home in Mexico. Jeffrey is not. It says, never before has Mexico seen so many American Jeffreys, Jennifers, and Aidens in its classrooms. The wave of deportations in the past few years, along with tougher state laws and persistent unemployment, have all created a mass exodus of Mexican parents who are leaving with their American sons and daughters. How do you feel when you hear stories about that, either because these children were born in America, so they are considered citizens, or perhaps experienced time here in their youth and then are brought back to Mexico where they may not even speak Spanish, speak the local language?
And we have some of those situations in my district, and it is a problem. But and there was a caller in to Sheila Jackson Lee before I came on who pointed out that when you have a flooding problem, first you cut off the water coming in. We don't need to cut off all immigration, but we do need to cut off illegal immigration. So first we stop the problem from getting any bigger, and then we can deal with the issue of the folks that are here, the American citizens that have been born here. But first you stop luring people in illegally, and you have border control, because not everybody coming in here is looking for jobs or benefits. Some are looking to do us harm. We know that. So first, you stop the problem from getting bigger, and then you deal with this. And you're going to end up actually seeing more people fleeing voluntarily if this administration's policies continue, the economy is going to get worse and worse, and they're going to realize this is not going well in America. They're going broke, and I need to get somewhere else. So I hope that we can create a problem where people want to come legally and not illegally, and you stop seeing so many problems like that.
Here are some statistics from immigrationpolicy.org looking at new Americans in Texas, your state. It says over 16% of Texans are foreign-born. 41.5% of Texans are Latino or Asian. 32% of immigrants in the state are eligible to vote. And then we come down here and we see that 87% of Texas's children with immigrant parents are actually U.S. citizens. And then 75% of children with immigrant parents are English proficient. So making up a big voting bloc in your state.
And actually, you know, I think Senator Rubio is correct. I do think eventually Hispanics are going to see that the Republican Party, what it's supposed to be, not some of the stuff we're doing, but what it's supposed to be is directly in line with what they believe. You know, this is my belief, but I studied history, was a history major, can keep studying history. I think one of the things that made America so great, the greatest country in history, I believe, was three basic things. There was a faith in God, there was a devotion to family, and there was strong work ethic. And I think we have largely lost those three things. And so when I see the Hispanic culture, I think it's a generalization, but I think it's very fair. I generally see a faith in God, a devotion to family, and a hard work ethic. I really see the Hispanic culture as being able to get us back to embracing the things that made us great. I want more of the Hispanic culture, but I want people to be Americans, to do it legally, do it the right way. And so it doesn't bother me at all to see increasing numbers, percentages being Hispanic. I think it's great for the country, and in the end will be good. But it's got to be done legally. That's the bottom line. And you mentioned the Jeffries in Mexican schools, but I think you would see a whole lot more Hispanic names when you go into American schools in Texas. And like I say, I think it's great. I think it's helping get America back where we needed to be if we don't corrupt the Hispanic culture from what they've been and what makes them so great.
Let's hear from a caller in Tempe, Arizona. Jan, Republican. Good morning.
Hi, Jan.
Oh, hi, Congressman. I am thrilled to talk to you. It's nice to talk to someone telling the truth. I have two things I want to say and then ask you a question. I was watching Morning Joe this morning. I know Elijah Cummings is on that same hearing committee with Darrell Issa, and he said to the Morning Joe people, oh, well, you know, this all started under this Fast and Furious. This started under President Bush, and our president, Obama, has put a stop to it. That's a number one lie. I want to tell the American people, when Bush started his, he did have one of these, but he worked with the Mexican government. He went there and got permission. Do you remember that, Congressman?
Yeah, that's right.
And then the other thing is, so here's Elijah Cummings on TV just lying through his teeth, and they don't even say anything. But then Sheila Jackson, on the same subject, said, well, you know, we just got to take this carefully. You know, this is the same Sheila Jackson on air and said, Trayvon Martin, and I could be Trayvon Martin, the president said, father. Well, you know, there's parents called Mr. and Mrs. Terry. They want to know what happened to Brian Terry. He was a war hero in Iraq, comes home, and then shot down like a dirty dog in the desert.
How does that relate, Jen? How does that relate? How does the agent relate to Trayvon Martin?
Because they would like to know the facts. Isn't it funny that the Attorney General can go scream about Trayvon Martin, can go scream about the President can say something, but they don't want to be involved with Brian Terry? I think the American people, the media hasn't talked hardly anything about Brian Terry. Okay,
we'll get a response from our guest. And let me show you also, Marcus is weighing in and has a different perspective, giving you some pushback to the comment that you made about Fast and Furious not being sort of regulated or overseen at all. He says the guns were monitored by tracking devices. Those devices failed, but it was not uncontrolled.
He's gotten different information than what I had. There were not monitoring devices on 2,000 guns. If he's got different information, I'd like to see it. We've had hearings about it. I've looked at classified documents and unclassified documents, and maybe Marcus has been privy to, in fact, maybe the Attorney General's given him documents that he hadn't been willing to give us. But as far as the comments of Brian Terry...
tell us more about him. He's the ATF agent
that was killed, and there was a weapon that was sold in Fast and Furious that was there at the scene where he was killed. Now, it may be that Marcus is thinking about they had all of the serial numbers of the weapons. Maybe that's what he's thinking about. They did have the serial numbers of the weapons, and that's how they knew that the gun at the scene where Brian Terry was killed was one that was sold through that program. Gun owners didn't even want to make those sales. Our ATF, our Justice Department, forced them to do it. That's why one of the gun owners, gun store owners, actually started recording conversations because he couldn't believe and didn't think anybody else would believe the federal government made him sell those guns. So it is a sensitive issue. It is shocking that there was no heads up to Mexico, even though the people involved in the program knew that the guns were going to end up probably down in Mexico, and didn't even give our friend a heads up, our neighbor. Pretty outrageous. That's not the way you make friends and influence people, especially your neighbors. So that was very disconcerting.
Let's hear it from Deborah, who's an independent caller in Houston, Texas. Good morning.
Hi, Deborah.
Good morning, Representative, and thank you, Susan. First of all, I'd like to point out that the agent that was killed, and God bless him, he was a law enforcement agent, and I think he knew the risk, and I'm sorry that he was killed, and I'd like to see that investigated. But Trayvon Martin was a teenager, killed by a citizen. So I'd like people to remember that. And what I'd like to ask the congressman is, I'm disabled, I'm a cancer patient, and you mentioned about the IDs for voting. And I paid my money for my new ID, and I got a paper receipt, and I never got the card. And when I called about it, I was told some third-party company called Maximus screwed it up and lost them. And I'm not going to pay again. I've got the paper receipt, and it's 2 years old now. It's good till 2013. So how am I going to vote with that? That's my question.
And that, you didn't get your voting card? Is that what you said you did?
My ID, my Texas ID.
Your Texas ID.
I've got a voting card. I've got it. I've been voting since I was 18. I'm 50 years old.
Well, thank you, and I really appreciate your doing that. And why don't you can call the Capitol Hill operator and ask them for my office. We'll get your information, and we'll start making calls to try to help you make sure you get your ID that you were supposed to get and that you paid for. That is not how it's supposed to work, and that's why you have elected representatives. The original idea is that we were supposed to be public servants, the word servant meaning servant. So if you would like for my office to help, we'll be glad to do that. Get your own representative involved. We'll do that, because you shouldn't have to go to any more trouble than you already have, Deborah, and it'd be an honor to help you. Thank you.
Let's hear from our next caller. Terry is a Democrat joining us from, I think we lost our Louisiana caller. Unfortunately, we'll move on to Ohio. Warren, Ohio is up next. Al, Republican. Good morning, Al.
Hey, Al.
Well, hey, good morning. Hey, isn't it how convenient? Isn't it really convenient that they keep blaming George Bush? As an American person, I'm just fed up with it. Everybody I talk to around the water cooler, we're tired of it. We know this Eric Holder has to go, and obviously we know when he's going to go. It won't be long. It's like 5 months. The one about the clubs in front of the voting booths did. He's in churches talking about this voter ID being racist. Like the last lady, get your ID, no matter what it takes. It's important. It's just ridiculous.
Al's breaking up on us a little bit in the call.
Yeah, I was having trouble.
But he's saying that there should be no excuse for getting a voter ID card.
Yeah.
We've heard from some elderly people who don't drive. We've heard from the disabled who've, in various states, said, well, I don't have a driver's license because I don't drive, and so they're concerned about not having the right.
But Libby, like in Texas, you can get a ride. You call in, you can get a ride, and also, you don't have to pay even the what little Deborah had to pay if you show that you cannot afford to make those payments. So it can be done, and people are not being blocked. But let me tell you, you know, we keep hearing this partisanship theme, and it is quite bothersome that partisanship does have such a role in some things. And what I would like to see is somebody on the other side of the aisle do what, with this Attorney General, what I did about one of Bush's Attorney Generals. When it came out that the national security letters had been badly abused and been used as fishing expeditions, I called the President's Chief of Staff and said, look, this is indefensible. He's got to go. I would like somebody on the other side of the aisle to be bipartisan enough as I was. I was more concerned about truth and people being responsible for terribly improper actions. And I'm not seeing that kind of bipartisanship that I had, because I didn't care. I really didn't consider it bipartisan. It was an issue of truth. There's an amendment today in committee, and I think John Conyers has a good amendment. It's not my party's amendment. I would like to see Democrats independently think and do the same thing from their standpoint, reaching out both sides. I think we'll be a lot better served when that starts happening, which is also why I'm not chairman of a subcommittee or committee. You don't get chairmanships if you don't toe the party line. That's something else that needs to be fixed.
Let's look at an issue that's come before one of your committees, Natural Resources, the BP oil spill, the blowout that happened really not too far from where you are in Texas. Here's a story on Fuel Fix. Texas Republicans suggest the feds went easy on BP. It says that you've suggested that the Obama administration overlooked BP's safety problems before the Gulf oil spill because the company promised to support White House-backed climate change legislation and the 2010 health care law. Tell us more about that, and then tell us about how things are going post-spill.
It is to work in our Gulf, in our precious waters, without being more safety conscious. If you looked through the same period, companies like Exxon and others, you know, you had one egregious violation, two egregious violations. Here was a company that had nearly 800, and it turned out on the very day that Deepwater Horizon blew out, they had BP officials visiting over with Democrats in the Senate about how to have their coming out party in support of cap and trade. I used to call it crap and trade, but the parliamentarian asked me if I'd do a favor and just call it cap and trade, and we'd get some calls going, does your boss know that's really cap and trade? Yes, he knew. But anyway, that's what leads me to wonder if that wasn't purely political. Why in the world would any company be allowed to function with that many safety violations? It's really egregious. And as far as the cleanup, it looks like nature did a better job of cleaning up than anybody else. I went along, being on natural resources and have jurisdiction over these issues. I drove along the coast and got out and filmed. I kept thinking I'd see massive amounts of oil all the way along from Louisiana to Mississippi, Alabama, and to Florida. Drove along those beaches, some of my favorite in the world. And, you know, you'd see one tiny drop of oil here or there, but things are going strong again, very strong again.
Congressman Gohmert represents Texas' 1st District. That includes Tyler, Longview, and Marshall. Let's get back to the phones and hear what Greg has to say from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Independent Line.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, how you doing?
I think okay.
I just want to understand a little bit better how my governor here in Florida can suddenly decide to start rezoning and redistricting neighborhoods for his benefit without getting the public consent, and deciding to purge and remove people from the voting polls just by random. He doesn't have any criteria he sets up. He's been just deciding to just randomly pick people, whoever he decides that might be somebody who might not be legally able to vote in our state. But most of those people that they found on this list have been legally able to vote and are citizens of Florida, and that's why we're so upset down here. Our governor does whatever the hell he wants to do down here. I mean, he gives away, he privatizes businesses, ex-state. He tried to do our prison system. He tried to do that, and that's why he has such a low popular. The people of this state just do not want this guy to make any more decisions relative to that kind of stuff. It's ridiculous.
We'll leave it there, Greg, and get a response.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the redistricting he's talking about, but because the governor can't just redistrict, so I'm not really familiar with that issue. With regard to purging the voting lists of people that are allowed to vote, it's my understanding the way they were doing it, picking out names that, based on information they had, were suspicious, perhaps they should be voting, perhaps they shouldn't be, and then they would do research on those to make that determination. And my understanding is the fact that you're able to know that some of the people that were originally listed were eligible to vote is that that's what they were doing. They were going through and finding people that might be suspicious and then determining whether or not they were. If they're doing anything improper, that absolutely needs to be dealt with. But my understanding is they're simply trying to purge their list of people who are dead or not allowed to vote. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not familiar with his popularity polls, saying people don't want him there, they don't want him to do anything else. I think there may be some. That may be one of those Yogi Berra deals, like where he said that restaurant's so popular nobody goes there anymore. Somebody must be liking what he's doing, but obviously the caller's familiar with some things I'm not.
Let's hear from Absalom, Democratic caller in Washington, D.C. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Congressman Gomez.
Yeah, I'm just Louis, but thank you.
Okay, there's just two questions. Well, the first, you said that the Constitution was built on the work ethic, but I just want to remind you that the White House, the Capitol, and the Monument were built with slave labor. That I don't know where work ethic comes in when you talk about having slaves do this. But my question to you is this. The District of Columbia is denied, I'm sure you oppose the District of Columbia attaining statehood, and yet and still Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution provides that Congress will have that jurisdiction that it exercises over the district over all federal lands. But the residents of Fort Hood, Texas can vote in state elections there. It can vote for representation in Congress of the United States. The people who live at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, can vote in the Virginia elections for representation in the state of Virginia. So I want you to tell me why the residents of the District of Columbia shouldn't be a state and be allowed to have representation in the Congress of the United States when you say that it's the people should control the government, not the government controlling the people.
Right. And that's a good question. And having spent 4 years at Fort Benning, Georgia, I understand exactly what you're talking about. But the people at Fort Belvoir can only vote in the Virginia election if Virginia is their place of residence. Texas continued to be my place of residence the 4 years I was in Georgia, and so I continued to vote in the Texas elections. It is different because those are people that are in the service and they have residences all over the country, even though they may be at Fort Hood or Fort Belvoir. The District of Columbia was set up, and it wasn't called the District of Columbia in the Constitution, but the idea of having an independent area where it was not part of a state, it was separate, and it would be controlled by Congress, and everyone here would have an interest in making sure it was a good city, well run, was something they contemplated. It was something they debated. Now, I wasn't aware that anybody proposed the District of Columbia being a state. You said I opposed statehood. I wasn't aware of anybody proposing D.C. be a state. But
there are efforts to.
Okay, front. But that was not the bill that was brought before us previously. The bill that was brought before us was just to give the District of Columbia a representative, a full voting representative. And the Constitution makes very clear the representative shall come from the several states. And they knew at the time there was going to be a District of Columbia. Everybody that was pushing for a representative in Congress would full for the residents of the District of Columbia. Unfortunately, I could not get Eleanor Holmes Norton to support either one of those bills. She wanted to push for a representative, despite what the Constitution says. I want to do it legislatively since it didn't look like it was going to happen as a constitutional amendment.
Representative Louis Gohmert joining us this morning. I wanted to mention one thing. This is from Slate, the Weigel blog run by Dave Weigel. Krista Bonner reports that the Florida governor, Rick Scott, has a relatively low approval rating. It's at 31%. That's the lowest it's been at this point. And he's entering the 2014 governor's race, still a ways off. The first declared Democratic candidate is ahead of him in polling at this early stage.
Well, it sounds like he's 3 or 4 more times popular than members of Congress, so he's doing better than Congress is. But obviously, if he's at 31%, the caller, he's not right in saying nobody supports, but it's certainly a big majority doesn't like what he's doing.
Let's get a call in from Asheville, North Carolina. Theta is a Republican. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd just like to tell the representative how much I always appreciate his honesty and integrity.
Thank you.
And I had a comment about the voter ID. I watched the Black Congressional Caucus meeting with the black pastors, and I've never heard a more racist conference. And I called several of their offices to ask what the threat was to voters, and nobody could tell me in their offices. And even one office, they told me to call Louisiana office. I called them. They took my name and number, said somebody would call me back, but nobody's ever called. So I think it's strange that they present that point, that it's a threat, but yet they can't tell you what the threat is. And also, I asked, when I called back to Congresswoman Waters' office, I got to thinking, hey, we have a black congressional caucus. I thought we were supposed to be segregated now, and why have a white congressional caucus if we've gone back to segregation?
Well, it's an interesting point, and I didn't see that conference, and so I really don't know what was said there, but Representative Sheila Jackson Lee had commented about the Voting Rights Act and the ability of the Justice Department to actually take actions against states because of prior discrimination. And that is true, and it is right, and that's why the Voting Rights Act was originally passed. But I truly believe that because this last 25-year extension was passed by a majority of states, some of which have districts with far more racial disparity in their voting than areas which have cleaned up their problem, but under the VRA, it's set up so that you constantly refer back to the original discrimination. It makes it almost impossible to ever get beyond having the Justice Department run our elections. I believe that, and our Attorney General in Texas didn't raise it, at some point somebody's going to raise an equal protection argument before the Supreme Court that states cram down the throats of states, some of which are doing a far better job racially in avoiding segregation, avoiding discrimination, far less, in fact, no racial disparity in some places, and that they are forced to abide under this punitive provision that some states with a bigger problem don't have to comply with. And I think, and I've talked to, I am conservative, but I've talked to liberal law professors who say, yeah, it is a violation of equal protection, but nobody's raised it.
Do you think there's a need, a usefulness to the Congressional Black Caucus, and what do you think about our caller's comments that she sees that as divisive?
Well, it is divisive if a group is promoting race is more important than anything else. That tends to divide us more than it brings us together. I think that's very unfortunate. And of course, I think she's being tongue-in-cheek when she said maybe there ought to be a white congressional caucus, because there'll never be a white congressional caucus because there would just be too much fussing, and frankly, I don't want a white congressional caucus. I think it's a bad idea. So, I don't know. I'm looking for, Libby, here's the bottom line. I really and truly am looking forward to the day, and I think we would not be that far from getting there. I hope this president, even though I didn't vote for him, didn't support him, I hope that he would get us to the day when we would really be living Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, where children are judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. And as long as we have organizations that define themselves by color, race, anything like that, it's going to continue to be divisive. And I'm looking forward to the day the dream is reached. I don't think we're that far if we would just have leaders quit using divisiveness to get elected.
Touching on the issue of history as a final thing, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, Senator of your state, Texas, is urging Juneteenth emancipation holiday. Celebrating Juneteenth, Texas is often recognized as the first state to officially recognize it. She is the Juneteenth Independence Day, recognizing this day, reading an order that officially freed the slaves in Texas, a state that had resisted the Emancipation Proclamation 2 years earlier. So looking back at history in 1865.
Well, they are important days, and I so admire John Quincy Adams, who believed after he was president that God was calling him to bring an end to slavery in America the way William Wilberforce was doing in England. I agree with those hellfire brimstone speeches he made on the House floor, that how can we expect God to keep blessing America when we were putting brothers and sisters in chains and bondage? I think it is a blight on our history.
So do you support that plan, the Senator Hutchinson's idea?
I like Senator Hutchinson. She's a good friend. I just need to look at the bill. I don't commit to anything until I read it. But I think it is important to observe days. You know, in fact, Libby, some people say, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. actually did a great thing for African Americans when they're missing the point. For little white children like me, as a Christian, he did a great thing for me. He ensured that as I got older, I didn't have to do like past generations of Christians. I could treat people of color as my brothers and sisters as they are. So he didn't just do a favor for black Americans. He did a favor for all of us, especially those of us, as he was, consider ourselves Christians. Treat people the way we were taught to treat them by Jesus himself.
Congressman Louis Gohmert, Republican of Texas, representing the 1st District. Thank you so much for coming in and talking with us this morning.
Thank you, Libby. It's great to be with you. I've been on with you before. I look forward to hope you'll have me again.
We'd love to have you on again. Thank you very much. Coming up next, Lois Beckett of ProPublica joins us to talk